I am the famous American. Recently I did a video differentiating nationality, national origin, ethnicity, religion, and personal beliefs. They're not necessarily one and the same as those of us here in the United States tend to conflate. Specifically, I had mentioned in that video the concept of atheist Jews. And I think this is a great example of how not necessarily all five of those things are all one and the same. So let's just unpack this and let's explore this a little bit further. So imagine the concept of an atheist Jew. Here in the United States, there are many people who would fall into that category, many of whom their ancestors or even their grandparents came here from Germany or Russia, etc. Their own parents were of the faith, the Jewish faith, but they themselves, as an adult now, do not identify with the Jewish faith, specifically even identifying as atheist or agnostic. So let's sort out that concept. So here in the United States, when we typically identify someone as Jewish or someone identifies as Jewish, typically we're referring to their religion more than anything. But also we're assuming too that if they took a DNA test, there's going to be genetic markers showing that person is linked back to that, such as the case with my mother. So you can have the DNA that points back to Jewish ancestry, but you could also have completely DNA that points not back to that at all, but then you're also practicing. But specifically, what I think would be interesting is to consider someone, let's say they took a DNA test. It confirms 100% Jewish DNA all the way through. And there have been some people who have told me on this channel that was the case for them. So let's imagine one of those people, 100% DNA Jewish, Sephardic Jewish, Russian Jewish, however it ends up. It's 100% Jewish DNA. But that person is not part of the Jewish faith. They're an atheist Jew. So let's say specifically though, they're here in the United States. So here would be the breakdown of this person. So in the United States, their nationality, American. Their national origin, and I'm making all this up, but let's say Russia and Germany. Their ethnicity, we could say Jewish. Their religion, we would say, in this case, none, even though their heritage goes back, all their ancestors pretty much were of the Jewish faith. And then lastly, their personal belief, again, would be similar, that, yeah, they're atheist or agnostic. They don't believe in the Jewish faith. So what's interesting, though, is if they weren't atheists, they would still be considered, we'd have these two things in common, which they were ethnically Jewish and they were of the Jewish faith. But I think this is quite an anomaly when we look at all of these things. Because here in the United States, for example, if you have an Italian last name, and especially if you are from the Northeast in the United States, chances are you're Catholic. You're an Italian American who is Catholic. That chances are that's going to be the case. Not always, but it's pretty predictable here in the United States. So it's important that we don't always conflate all of these things, but it's interesting that we can begin to unpack them and understand them a little bit better. For example, you could be a Japanese American who, despite your parents having a different religion or no religion, you may be Baptist, you may be very conservative Christian. So it's interesting to sort all those out, but especially here in the United States, because we, for lack of a better word, are somewhat of a melting pot to some degree, as far as there being a true American DNA, that someone takes the DNA test and it would say United States. It's not going to, because if anything, we'd be referring to Native Americans. And that's where it really gets dicey too, because there was like 2,000 nations of Native Americans here in the United States originally. And so if you were saying that to a Native American, they'd say, well, you can't say that I'm the same as this other Native American. We're from a different tribe altogether. But that's how we try to simplify things as we are exploring the concept of race. Let's keep talking about this. This is interesting, right? You've spent 5 minutes of your time watching this. Why don't you add to it in the comments, and maybe I'll make a video based on your comment. I am the famous American.